Just a note before we start. Our show talks about touchy subjects that may be difficult for some of our listeners. Take care of yourself. If you feel you need to seek help, see the links at the end of our show notes for resources.
Hey, y'all, and welcome to Touchy Subjects Podcast, a podcast that aims to break the silence that tends to come with conversations around domestic and sexual violence. I'm Sean.
And I'm Amanda.
And today we're going to be talking about safety tools for tabletop RPGs with our special guests, Kienna and Lauren. So thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for
You're
having
welcome.
us.
We're really excited to be here.
Yes, and we are very excited to have you. Just from the discussion we had last time when we were setting up this, I'm super pumped to have this discussion. But before we jump into it, would the two of you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Kienna Shaw. I am one of the co-creators of the TTRPG Safety Toolkit alongside Lauren. I am also a game designer and writer for tabletop RPGs. So for those of you unfamiliar, if you've ever heard the name Dungeons and Dragons or Vampire the Masquerade, we're talking about pen and paper role-playing games. When you sit down, have some dice, and play a game. And so I get to write for them. And also do safety tool design and advocacy alongside Lauren.
Yeah, my name is Lauren Bryant-Monk. I am the other co-curator of the TTRPG Safety Toolkit. And basically the same thing. I'm a game designer. I'm a safety consultant for games and sort of gaming spaces, like periphery app type things. Um, yeah.
Oh, thank you both for that. And like I said, we're both very excited to have this conversation because I'm very much a nerd, as listeners of our podcast definitely know by this point. So it's always fun when I can combine the two things that I like to do into one thing. So in the work doing discussions on like sexual assault and domestic violence prevention and playing Dungeons and Dragons, it's very rare that I get to have a conversation combining them. So thank you. So just kind of jumping into this then, what is the tabletop RPG safety toolkit?
Yeah, so
You go
go
for
ahead.
it, Lauren.
The TTRPG Safety Toolkit is a collection of safety tools and resources around safety tools for playing your tabletop role-playing games. If you don't know what a safety tool is, it's basically some sort of script or mechanics, some sort of mechanism that you bring into your game to help you navigate around touchy subjects or um, uh, uncertain moments where not everybody might be on the same page about what's going on. And these are basically most of them are social scripts or some kind of way to signal that we need to stop playing, we need to stop role playing and have a discussion about what is going on in the game and what we're going to do going forward.
So, for our audience members who may not really be familiar with RPG games and what that really means, can you just briefly describe for everybody like how it goes, how it starts, and like where the scenarios come from that people are engaging in these games, just so that everybody's on the same page?
Yeah, so I mean, it varies from game to game, but essentially, the concept is you have a group of people that are sitting down, either they're friends or strangers or whatever, to play this game. Usually, there is someone who is the game master, and they're the ones who are basically developing the story and the world and the NPCs, the non-playable characters that the players will interact with and go through during their play session. Um, as you play the game, there's often a combination of of mechanics. So, for example, rolling some dice to see whether an action succeeds or fails. Some levels of improvised storytelling, where people are coming up with elements of their story through role play. So, by pretending to be their character, and by the world responding to it. And together creating an emerging narrative in a sense. Some people some game masters come up with their stories completely wholesale. They're just making stuff up on their own. Sometimes they go and buy books or scenarios written by other people that can be used as a guideline for playing at their table. And then people who are coming in with their characters as players will come up with backstories and will come up with characters and find ways for them to, be their own people within the game world. So there's this element. There's this again. It's kind of like I like to say it's structured, improvised storytelling. You have something that helps give you some structure in terms of like rules, but a lot of the fun and play of tabletop role playing games is the fact that you're together making up a story and having fun doing that. And so that's where a lot of the uncertainty comes from. You don't always know what's going to happen, and so there's the chance of touching upon things that people are not comfortable with, or using topics and storytelling beats that pull from other pieces of media that also may touch on, things that are uncomfortable to take a look at, or can be triggers for people. And so basically, to tie it back into the toolkit and safety tools, these are just ways for us to help ensure when we're coming to the table to play together, we know what we want to play. We know what topics we want to explore and not explore in the story that we're telling together. And we also know how to navigate it when we accidentally touch upon those things, when we don't realize that we're approaching something that we're uncomfortable with, or we're crossing a boundary that we didn't realize was there before, or we did realize was there before, but we had forgotten in the moment of having a really cool, combat sequence, and we're like, oh shoot, I forgot, because we got so excited that this is a thing that we agreed we weren't going to do. So it's just ways for us to navigate those difficult conversations of consent and boundaries and all that stuff, which is, something that we struggle with and navigate in every other aspects of our lives. We just also apply it to the fun of playing a game with your friends.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. I just think it's really important that even people who are maybe vaguely familiar with what those things are can fully understand what this topic is going to be and how important it is to make sure that everyone that's playing at your table is comfortable with all of the different things that are going on in that game. So thank you.
And I especially like it too, even when it comes to like groups of people that you've known for years. Because yeah, you might know these people for a very long time, but you might never have had those like discussions about like, what are your triggers, or what are you afraid of, or what would you prefer me to not have discussed, or would you not want to be included in a game? Because those might just not be things that just come up, or it's just not something they felt super comfortable sharing. So it's nice that this toolkit does kind of help them get some tools to be able to have those conversations that are a bit more touchy, or they're harder conversations that they may not have had before. So when we're looking at the toolkit, it was one of the things that I liked about it is it breaks it up into those phases. So you talked about how you have your dungeon master, you have your people who are playing, you have the story that's being built throughout. So when you're looking at starting, like playing this game, you might end up having something called like a session 0, which is going to be that like introduction to the game. This is what we want included. These are the things that we might not want to have included, or having those conversations about like while you're building a character. So there's you're going to get your first phase, your second phase of playing, and then the third phase of like kind of when the game is over, what happens next. And I like that this toolkit really breaks that up into those 3 phases for people so that they can see like there are different tools for each one of them. So when you were putting this toolkit together, how did you decide you wanted to break those phases up? And then looking at the techniques given or the tools given, how did you find what tools you felt worked the best for each one of those?
Well, so one of the things that is interesting, I think, of about the toolkit and the way we build it is that we are what we did was we took existing safety tools that other people had written over, many years. Some of them are, I think the one I know that is the oldest, which may not be the oldest, but the one that I can put a date on that is the oldest is like over 20 years old at this point. And so we were looking at all of these things that people created as it sort of organically came up in their games. They created to fill sort of a specific need depending on their play style, depending on what was going on. So it's pretty evident in when you're collecting all of these safety tools to figure out where they go in the game, because a game like a tool like lines and veils, which is a tool that people can use to talk about the things that they are okay with having in the game, or not okay with having sort of obliquely referenced to in the game versus the things that they don't want in the game at all. And that tool is really something that you can use in the middle of a game, and actually, Kienna and I both recommend that that a lines and veils thing is, kind of constantly being updated, but it's was designed to be part of that session zero discussion, to be part of finding out what people were and weren't okay with, so that a GM could go and write a story. Because if you're, like writing a story that takes place completely underground, all in tunnels, and somebody is like, oh, I'm claustrophobic and that would be terrible, then maybe the GM can think about, okay, is the tunnels really important part of this story? How can I change it to, like, make it to help with that sort of claustrophobia thing? Or if there's a big spider monster and somebody is deathly afraid of spiders, then maybe it's a beetle, because maybe beetles are less scary. And then there are other tools that are more meant for in the middle of play. One of the ones that is probably most well known is the X card, and that one is for in the middle of play, when somebody kind of when something happens and someone doesn't want it to happen, doesn't want a topic mentioned, they can play an X card either by saying X or tapping a card on the table, and then play stops, and the whatever content they wanted to X card was removed. And that's really great for in the middle of a game, but it is less effective at the beginning or at the end of a game. Once again, not totally, like, you can retroactively X card things after a session is over, but it's most efficiently, or efficiently is the wrong term, but it's kind of best used in the middle of play. That's what it was meant for.
Yeah. Well, it's like I can see that being, like, obviously, like, best used like in the moment, because if that's something they really don't want discussed and the X is used like after the game, like, they've already had to sit through that, and that's not going to be super fun for them when the main objective of playing this game is to have fun.
Yeah, I do think it's important, though, that specifically with the X card, and this is where the third section of tools that we talk about in, or the way we set up the kit, is that you can sort of retroactively X card things, because sometimes you don't realize that what's been going on is triggering to you until after. You're sort of caught up in the moment, or you're disassociating, or you're in shock, or you thought it was okay at the time, and then once you have some time to reflect, you go, oh, I really wasn't okay with that. And that's where sort of decompression tools and review tools, this sort of third, like post play tools, I usually describe them as, are really helpful to give people a chance to sort of reflect on what just happened in the game, how they feel about it, and to do it sooner rather than later, and to do it in a safe space, um are, you know, surrounded by people, so you're not just, you know, you don't just leave the game and then you're driving home alone in your car at night thinking about all of the terrible things that happened to you.
So just for like reference sake, like, so maybe in our like thing, I'm like, I don't really love spiders, but you know what, it's probably not going to be bad, like I'm not going to say anything. And then in this game, my character gets ripped apart by a spider. I go home at night and I have horrible nightmares about being ripped apart by a spider. I'm going to use that retroactive X card and be like, we got to cut that out. Like, that can't continue in this game because it's not good for me and my health. So, like, but with that though, like, you're going to have to really focus in on that communication with your team, right? Like, that is going to be what's most important. You're going to have to be honest with yourself. You're going to have to be honest with everybody else that's playing the game. And it's going to have to be kind of a trusting circle, right? Like, everybody's going to have to know that their feelings are going to be honored, and that nobody's going to try and step over those lines, at least intentionally. We, like, you know, we said that sometimes you get caught up in the game and like stuff happens, but no one's going to be ignoring those things that you've kind of set those boundaries for, right?
Yeah, and I think this goes back to, so ultimately we initially developed the toolkit as a space for people to go and reference all these tools that exist out there. You know, our origin story essentially is like we were introduced to safety tools in our own plays, in our own games, and being like, oh, why have we never heard of this before? It's because they were scattered to the four winds across, you know, dead internet forums and like you know, social groups that don't exist anymore in the gaming community. And so we just wanted to have a place where we just put everything together so that people can have a central place that they go and find these resources, and they can use them, because that's ultimately the best thing about a tool is knowing how to use it and knowing where to find it. But as we were developing it, we were also developing this thought of all of these only work if we're creating a culture of care in our gaming spaces. And by that, what we mean is that ultimately, the people at the table, your players, your game master, everyone who's sitting there and playing the game, matter more than the game itself. Because we exist in a culture, or especially when we were starting in like the 2010s, where the idea was that the game master word was law, and whatever you put down the game you could never take back, because that would be breaking the sanctity of role-playing games, right? There's you can't change anything about what you did, and that is often what led to people getting hurt at the table, because it meant that there could be no communication. There was no sense of, hey, like, could we change something about this? There was no sense of be able to establish your consent and your boundaries, and so people would stumble across their triggers and have people very gleefully stomp over them because of a power trip, in a sense. And so even in the best case scenarios where people are just playing a game for having fun and everyone's having a great time, there is always the sense that even if something bad happens and you don't want that to be happening in your game, oh, well, you can't say anything because that's just the nature of the game. And so we really wanted to push back on that. And of course, you, as we said, as you pointed out, you can't really use these tools without that sense of communication. And by just simply saying that we care about the people at the table, that establishes the foundation for this entire situation, for the ability to have your consent respected, to have that communication available. Even for people who don't want to use formal safety tools, if they just want to have informal conversations when things come up, if they don't want to go by a script, that's totally fine. But what they do need is they need to prescribe to the sense of, well, we're caring for people, we're caring for ourselves, and we're caring for each other. And that comes before all else.
Yeah. And just think of how much more fun like all the players at the table would have knowing that they can talk to their DM and say, like, hey, I really don't want this included in this. They're gonna have more enjoyment out of it because they know they're not gonna have to worry about something possibly happening that they're not going to be okay with or is going to be triggering for them.
Yeah. And it means everyone else also has fun because if you know what's off the table, if you know what you're not touching upon, you can go very hard on the stuff that you are all good with. Horror is a great example of this, being able to be like, well, I'm not super into spiders, but like I love body horror, give me all that. And everyone has free reign to really dive into it. And it's like the thrill of, I love using like bungee jumping as a really good example of like kind of that idea of like you get the thrill of like feeling like you're possibly exploring things that are dangerous or things that are taboo or things that are uncomfortable, but knowing that you have something that is preventing you from just going splat or going into things that you don't want to get into means that you can just kind of let yourself go and really just dive in because you have a safety line. You have something that's there to keep you back from going too far.
Yeah. And we're gonna keep mentioning it. It's like going back to that communication piece is like that's the most important part of this because like you said, Kienna, this is a collaborative storytelling. Like that first and foremost, that's what RPGs are. It's collaborative storytelling. And if you do not feel comfortable having a conversation with someone about the path you want your character to go or something you don't want your character to ever experience, because like that would be very awful for me to have to like try to envision that happening. It's like that person's going to be on edge, but also it's not going to be a good story. And if you want this to be a good story and have everyone have fun, you have to be able to communicate. So really kind of jumping into that communication piece then, for people who might be afraid or might not feel comfortable having those harder conversations, how would you suggest they approach them?
I think so it really depends, and that's why we talk of what Kienna was saying is that sometimes people aren't comfortable using scripts, but sometimes people find scripts really helpful to give them the words that they feel a little bit more or that they have a harder time coming up with on their own. I think one of the things that can really help is whoever's sort of facilitating the experience to say at the beginning that my story is not as important as your experience, as your health, as your emotions. I think really just setting that up from the beginning can really sort of make a difference. I was playing a game just a few weeks ago with some new people, and I wasn't facilitating the experience, but they had us all sort of in break-off groups, and I just mentioned like what do we want to use for safety tools, how do we want to approach it, how something is going, and we decided talking at the table that we didn't want to use like a formal X card, or we didn't want to go around and do sort of a lines and veils, but we did decide that we all made we all came to an agreement that if somebody wasn't okay with something happening, that this was a place where they could stop at any time and say, I'm not okay with this happening. Can it happen in a different way? And what somebody shared with me after, and this was somebody I had never met before, was that by me, even though I wasn't the GM of the experience, asking at the beginning, like, hey, can we talk about how we're going to handle this? It made them feel a lot more comfortable immediately. Like, it immediately set the tone that this was a place where we were going to trust each other and be open with each other. And as a result, we told a really sort of emotionally intense story with like a lot of you know, like a lot of romance and discussions of like sex and sexuality and things that you wouldn't necessarily normally do with a bunch of strangers, but because we had had that discussion at the beginning, we felt a little bit more comfortable starting to explore those boundaries. And so I think even just bringing up like, and even if you've never heard of a safety tool before, but you would like to start trying to use them, going, I've never heard of this before, but I just found out about it and I want to talk about it. Or you know, I want to make sure that nobody is, you know, I'm writing a story, I'm running this game, and you know, spiders are a really big part of it. I say spiders a lot because I'm not okay with spiders, by the way. But you know, spiders are a really big part of it, and I just want to make sure before I start writing it that everyone's okay with me telling a really spider heavy story, because if they're not, I'm gonna write something different. And just sort of bringing it up is a really useful way to start talking about it, because I think people often feel like that is not the norm. You know, they feel like they are signing up to be taken along for a ride, like watching a movie or playing a video game. And so, especially new players. And so getting the being told that you have a say in these really fundamental things is a good start.
So that did make me think of a question though too. When so if someone is playing, and let's say that they really feel like they don't have a say in like the story or like things that are happening, what would you suggest to them then?
Well, I would suggest for them to take a look at whether this is a gaming space where they feel that they can bring this up as a problem, as an issue. Um, do they feel comfortable communicating with the people at the table, whether that's the game master or fellow players, to address this? And if not, look at the reason why and see if there's a possibility that this is not the group for you and this is not the game for you. We love saying a no game of uh, of no game is better than a bad game. If you're having a bad time, if the space that you're in is unhealthy for you, it's you're not able to have your consent be respected. It is better to find a different game with potentially different people than it is to try to stick it out and make it better. I think it is important sometimes to, again, realize ultimately this is a low stakes environment. You're able to practice a lot of the real life skills of how to navigate consent and boundaries in your gaming spaces. But ultimately, so it's not life or death. And it is important to sometimes go, if this is not an environment where I can feel like I can communicate with my people, and because they're not going to listen to me, or they're going to dismiss me, or they're going to make fun of me, get out of there, please. Please do something different. That is there. I promise you, there are better games out there. There are better people out there. There are better groups out there that will respect you and care for you. And because clearly these other people, if you don't feel comfortable approaching them about this, are not following the principle of care, and you deserve something better than that.
Yeah, and we are in such a wonderful moment now in gaming where leaving a table that doesn't feel good for you and finding another table is so easy, because there's so much support for online gaming that wasn't there even, you know, 3 or 4 years ago when Kienna and I started the safety toolkit. In that, you know, like I think Kienna and I both have had the experiences of, you know, being in the basements of comic shops and playing with the local, you know, D&D group, and finding that not really the right place, not really the right vibe, having things happen in game that you know make you feel like you fundamentally can't trust these people, or that um they won't listen to you when you say no, or you know, or even they're just, you know, you don't like their style and you want to find something that's a different style. And so that's why I went to playing games online. And because of that, I was able to, you know, find my people. And um I think I hear so many stories about people who stayed at tables for a really long time, um because they felt like that was their only game, or they felt like they had to stick it through, you know, because where else were they going to find people who wanted to play D&D with them? um and that's just not the case anymore. And you know, playing with strangers is really scary at first, but they don't stay strangers for long. And you know, there are still technology limits for some people, but it's so much easier to play with more people than it has been ever before. So I would really encourage anybody who didn't feel safe or comfy with their current gaming group to just play with someone else. And that doesn't mean you don't have to be friends with them, or you know, that you're like cutting them out of your life. It just means that you can't play games with them.
Yeah. We all have people who we can do some things with, but not others. So this is just one of those other situations where maybe they're not great people to play with, but you still enjoy going out to the bar and grabbing a drink with them. So, Kienna, you've mentioned it a few times now, and I know we wanted to hit on this point so we can kind of like transition into it, because this toolkit does a really good job of giving people the opportunity, like you said, in a low stakes situation, to be able to start having those harder conversations that we might not have regularly. So, if we want to start looking at kind of trying to create a culture of care, how can this toolkit help with that? And then how can we start to kind of pull that out of gaming and use that in our everyday lives?
Yeah, I mean, again, so ultimately the safety tools are uh, agreed upon ways in which we have difficult conversations about these things, or how we handle when things happen. Um, I like to kind of think about it as, you know, how in a like a soccer game, for example, um, you know, you're playing your game, but if the referee blows the whistle and holds up a card, like a red card or a yellow card, everyone knows to stop and respond to whatever that card is. So, for example, if you're playing the game and somebody falls over and gets hurt, the ref blows the whistle, a card is pulled, the person is taken off the scene, is taken care of. And it's just this process that everyone has agreed upon will happen if someone gets injured on the scene, or if somebody is, you know, breaking a rule, or if somebody's doing, you know, something else. You just have the processes in place to uh, cut out a lot of the places where things get wibbly wobbly with feelings and with the heightened emotions or pain. Um, and instead, you can just kind of follow step by step. Um, and because everyone's agreed upon it, you have no argument about what's right or wrong here. Um, and so the same thing goes for safety tools in the game. You have these agreed upon processes that you bring in. And so that when something happens, for example, oops, we go into something that I'm not comfortable with. I know that I can use this script, this tool to go, okay, well, let's do XYZ. You know, we pause the game, we have a discussion about what we liked about this moment, what we didn't like about this moment. We have a discussion about what we can replace it with, and then we resume play. And we can look at this as ways of how we can also put that into our real life. Because a lot of the time when we talk about conversations of consent or conversations of boundary setting, we don't have a lot of agreement about what that conversation looks like, other than you talk, you come to an agreement that this thing is okay or not okay, and then that's it, right? You don't really have this set process for how you go from point A, which is we're both feeling different ways about something, to point B, we have agreed upon something and we can move forward with stuff. And so I think one, getting people to accept more of those types of processes in their lives, either creating it themselves or finding spaces online where people have kind of developed these types of like tools for how do you have these difficult conversations with each other, and kind of going that step-by-step process. But also two, just like finding ways to what the toolkit does, what the safety tools do is that they let you say that it's okay to interrupt the status quo for your safety and comfort. We live in a society where saying no is frowned upon. We live in a society where being difficult is considered, quote unquote, being difficult is considered a bad character trait, right? We want everyone to be cooperative. We want everyone to go along with everything. Games and the toolkit and safety tools provide a space where you can start saying no to things on a fairly low stakes field to get you more comfortable with saying no to things in other spaces in your life. So you're not the same for me personally, me being able to say no to, having sexual violence in my games, for example. Like, I don't want to explore that. That's not my thing. Also means that as I get into watching movies or reading books or stuff, and if I can kind of critically then go, okay, if someone's suggesting this thing to me, I can go, no, actually, I don't think that I don't like this piece of media because of this of sexual violence, and that's just me. We can and it's just and it expands further. A lot of safety tools has their roots in the kink space. A lot of them have ultimately a lot of if you put a Venn diagram of safety tools and like kink consent tools, there's like 80% the same thing. And so, in your sex life, or in any of that, being able to say no and to navigate compromise and while still respecting each other is just a really important thing to practice. Games just provide a great space for doing that with your friends in that environment, and then just being able to just go, okay, what processes can I bring into my everyday life? What ways can I say no? What ways can I identify places that are caring for me? How can I provide an environment of caring for other people? I think are just things that you just practice like a muscle, and that you just keep doing.
Right, because if you can get comfortable in an RPG game saying, I don't like this, and if this is what continues, then, and you're not going to respect the fact that I don't like it, I'm going to find someone else who does, that practice can then translate into the rest of your life, where you can look at your friend groups, you can look at your romantic relationships, you can look at your work relationships and say, no, that's a boundary I have, and I'm not comfortable doing this. And you can learn how to be a little bit more, I don't really want to say forceful, but kind of in a way, like be more forceful about your boundaries and what you will and won't accept. And it's just it's a way to practice those things with low stakes, like you said, and get comfortable using it in places that have higher stakes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually one of my favorite things about safety tools is that since I started using them, I felt a lot more confident saying no to other people about other things.
Well, and even with that like being able to say no and flex that muscle and practice it, it's not also lost on the fact that if you're saying no to the person who is running the game, you're saying no to an authority figure, because this is the world that they have created and you're playing it just one character in this big world. But if you're able to say no to them and they respond in a way that's like, oh yeah, nope, sorry, I made a mistake, that didn't happen, let's take it back, let's go do something else, or let me just change that around real quick to make everyone more comfortable. Not only does that make it easier for you to then be able to say no to those in your life who are authority figures, but also it gives you a really good model of what it's supposed to look like when you say no to an authority figure.
Yeah, it also helps you understand what it's like to be cared for, because I think a lot of us who, have had sort of difficult relationships in the past don't always have the right idea of like what, true kindness and what true care is. I remember one time I was playing a game with a friend and my GM. um there was a cat, and we were like mice, and we were fighting a cat. And I said, no, I'm actually, right now in my personal life, I can't really deal with fighting a cat. Can we fight something else? And then we were playing some other game, and a cat came up and a cat got hurt, and I didn't really think about it that much. But later that night, my friend, who was the GM in both circumstances, uh, came up to me and said, I'm so sorry. I forgot that you aren't okay with cats being hurt. So I'm really sorry that I included it in the game. And I hadn't even really noticed it, but just knowing that somebody, remembered that from last time, realized that they had made a mistake and felt like they needed to, make sure I was okay and apologize to me about it when I hadn't even really been thinking of it, really helped model that, like, this is what like friendship and care is, right?
With that too, I mean, this also gives people who are maybe not used to being told no some room to practice being told no. It gives them an opportunity to be able to share those feelings and be that caring person in a world where they might not otherwise feel comfortable doing that. So, I mean, especially if we're talking about, like, I don't know, I'm just stereotypically like a male or male presenting DM who is always supposed to have this tough exterior and, be authoritative and my way or the highway kind of stuff. It gives them an opportunity to work on being able to care about other people and show that emotion until they can get comfortable with it outside of the game as well.
Yeah, and accepting, rejection of an idea with grace as opposed to with defensiveness.
And thinking about this from the perspective of like, if somebody's experienced like sexual assault or domestic violence, where they have been in situations where power has been taken from them, being in a situation where now they're able to have some of that power and say like, no, I don't like that. That is incredibly healing for someone who has actually now being heard by someone when multiple past experiences they may have had was no one listens.
I do think an important thing to sort of bring up here is that some safety tools are better for different sorts of people than others, and that um, we're talking a lot about agency and accepting, no, I'm not okay with this. One of the sort of most famous examples, and we talk about it, or it's included in the safety toolkit, is the Luxton technique. And the Luxton technique is something that came or that is often presented as an alternative to an X card, as an alternative to saying, no, this never happened. Because it's important to remember that in a lot of situations, especially situations with sexual violence, like being told this never happened can actually make things a lot worse. And so when you're looking at safety tools, and that's why it's a kit, that's why it's a toolkit, because there are different tools for different situations. You're not going to use a hammer to like screw in a nail, right? Like it won't work. And so I think it's important to remember that there are different approaches for different things, and all of that can really help. And it's really important to have a conversation about with people about how you're going to handle those sort of situations, because maybe somebody needs to pretend it never happened, just doesn't want to imagine it happening at all. But maybe somebody else at the table isn't okay with that, and you need to then sit and have a discussion about how you can handle it in a way that is caring of everybody's situation.
So really this discussion too around those really like hard things that people experience or traumatic things that people experience, and even maybe to a lesser extent not as traumatic things, but they just want to kind of explore new stuff. Playing tabletop RPGs can be a really good way to kind of explore those things, like in the lower stakes setting, but also it can give them an opportunity to help navigate something that they might not have tried to navigate before or haven't really had a whole lot of success in. Like as an example for myself, I have an immense fear of death. I am terrified of dying. Never going to work on it. My therapist and I joke, mainly because we know I'm never going to kill myself. But I can use that fear of death for a character that I can play then in it and explore those themes in an area in a way that's going to be a bit low stakes and more safe for me to do so than trying to be like, how do I explore death in real life without actually doing it? So how can we use not only this toolkit, but tabletop RPGs as a means for catharsis?
I mean, I think an important thing to note, as we talked about before, is that safety tools and the principle of care and everything help you not only tell you what things you don't want to explore, but also things you do want to explore. And sometimes that does include darker topics. There are some wonderful games out there that do explore things that are typically considered taboo or are hard to talk about. The one that comes to mind for me is Bluebeard's Bride, which is a game about feminine horror. Often touches upon topics of body image and talks about how women are oppressed and the sexual violence and everything that's folded into how women experience terrible experiences in their life. And that can be a really wonderful game to play, but can only be really done if everyone's okay with the things that are being presented within the game itself. So that's where you come into the safety tools of before you start playing, like you all sit down and you talk about, hey, is this an experience we want to have? Are there things that we can take out of this or add to it that will make this a more enjoyable experience for us? But providing the option for people to, instead of just saying, no, we're not having any racism, no sexual violence, no transphobia, no anything in any game ever, does take out a lot of agency for people to try exploring those topics on a more safe environment. Be able to be a space where you can play those out, explore them, while also knowing that you have things to back out of them with, to say, actually, can we like take it a step back? Can we like abstract it out for a sec? Can lead to some very powerful gaming experiences, very powerful stories, but two, also some levels of cathartic experiences for people where they're able to explore something that has impacted them in an environment that is, again, lower stakes because it's not real life. It is a game. And delve in, knowing that other people are there to check in on them, will listen to them if, things change, because people's comfort level will change with time. That can be from like a week to week basis, day to day basis, hour to hour basis. Something that I might have agreed to before, I can back out, but in the moment, right? That is an important part of consent and communication, is that I can withdraw my consent at any point. So having all these nets for ensuring that where you're exploring is comfortable and fun for you ultimately, and or cathartic, and the option to opt out or adjust is there. It's a very powerful experience, and we have seen this across the gaming space. There have been several people who have struggled with different mental illnesses or struggled with moments of oppression and marginalizations, and sometimes being able to kick a rapist in the face is what you want in your game. And just saying, barring, oh no, rape never happens in games ever, it takes away it's kind of like the same way of how we some people have issues with just pretending that something never happens. uh you know just pretending that the society is perfectly fine or that these things don't happen can delegitimize some people's feelings about their experiences. And so just again providing options. The entire point of the toolkit and the tools are providing options for people to have the gaming experiences they want in a place that they feel cared for, in a way that cares for others, and ultimately just have fun and enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah, a lot of times people talk about, when people hear about safety tools for the first time and they feel resistant towards it. Sometimes people will say, "Oh, you know, they just want to censor my game, they just want to take out everything that's fun, or and sanitize it all." And that's not the point of safety tools. Like, the point is not to sanitize, but to sort of control in a way. They're guardrails, right? They're making sure that you can walk on a cliff and not fall off it accidentally. You're um and making sure that everybody wants to walk on that same cliff at the same time, as opposed to one person deciding that they're really into this one avenue to explore and other people aren't. So I really, yeah, I think it's important to remember that this isn't about making things wholesome or kid friendly or safe or whatever. As much as you can use tools to do that, you can also use tools to get into really dark stuff in a way that isn't putting you in danger, and it also isn't putting your friends in danger. Nobody signed up to be your therapist, unless you're playing games with your therapist.
Would not recommend playing games with a therapist. That feels like a breach of some weird patient therapist relationship. Maybe don't do that, but
yes. But also, if you're feeling like Dungeons and Dragons or like Pathfinder or any other tabletop RPG is like where you want to explore some of these topics, if you're someone who's experienced a trauma but haven't talked to a therapist about it, maybe also do that along with having that theme be something you're willing to explore. Because if you haven't really worked through some of that trauma with a therapist or through some healing journey, it might get real rough for you if you're like, the first thing you say is like, I want to explore this in D&D. I've done no healing though, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and there are therapists who do use gaming like in a therapeutic practice, and it's very cool. But it's only they're very strictly controlled situations, and yeah, games are. People talk a lot about how games are therapy, or games are therapeutic, and I mean games can be incredibly healing for people. But I think that's another thing to sort of talk about in safety tools, is that like they only do so much. Like they're only they're only tools. They're not going to make, they're not going to heal you.
Well, thank you both for joining us today. This has been an incredibly fun conversation. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have. But before we sign out here, is there anything that you would like our audience to know, or anything else anyway?
I mean, obviously we love tabletop role-playing games. This is our life, and we hope that people are interested in checking it out, especially because we are building this we're in a movement right now of having spaces where we play in games where people care for each other, and I think it's important to also look at this as not just a game situation. I talk about how it is low stakes because not real life, but as with many other spaces in our media and in what we watch and what we play and what we do, these are all spaces where consent and care and all these things are important and will reflect out into the rest of our life. Like, obviously, we wouldn't be here on the podcast if that wasn't the case. And so I think it's important to recognize that all these that consent and care is not just from the point of view of uh, your relationships or the stereotypical spaces where we think about, oh yeah, we have to navigate talking about what our boundaries are in like a kink space or whatever. Like, they belong everywhere, and there are people and places that are working towards making our society a better space for respecting consent, respecting boundaries, respecting people as people.
So, if you are a person who is a DM or who owns or operates a space where these kinds of games are played, like a comic shop or a game shop or something like that, this can also be your opportunity to push that out to the people who come to your space and say, hey, I love that everybody comes here and plays these games, but here's something I want you all to try. It's called Tabletop Safety Toolkit, and I just want you to all go through that, and I'm gonna post stuff about it, like whatever, like just make sure that that's out there, that people can see it, can know it, and can understand it, and know that it's something that is going to be required in your game space.
Yeah. I think the last thing I want to say for now is that if this is your first time hearing about safety tools, um that's okay. And that, if something happened to you that was very upsetting in a game, or that you did something that you really regretted as a GM that really hurt a player, like, it's that wasn't your fault. Like, it's not your fault that you didn't know about these things. And if you're in a situation where you're not comfortable with something that happened and you didn't say something, that's not your fault either. We're all on a journey of learning these things. So I think, now that you're that much more empowered. But we all start from somewhere. We all learned about safety tools for the first time at some point. So welcome to this wonderful journey. But don't feel guilty about not knowing about it before. Don't feel like had terrible gaming experiences, or were a really bad GM because you didn't know about it before.
Well, thank you both for that. And before we sign out here, then, if someone was interested in looking at the safety toolkit, where could they find it?
Well, we now have a website, brand new website that we just launched. It's TTRPGSafetyToolkit.com. We are also on social media at TTRPG Safety Toolkit if you prefer to get your updates that way. Basically, it's a living resource, so we will update with new tools. We get a translation from wonderful volunteers across the globe. So we update with those, and we post on social media when that happens. So check that out. It is a Google Drive, basically. But we have a website that's kind of a landing page that helps explain everything, and keeps it all in one place.
Awesome. And then, do either of you have socials that you want to push out at all to our audience?
Yeah, I mean, I am at Kienna S everywhere, so KIENNAS. That's basically my handle on any particular site that you want to go look at. Because there are so many social medias. I don't want to list all of them.
There's too many.
Yeah. I was like, usually I give my Twitter, but is that really the move
X,
now?
Twitter.
Uh but uh I'm starving soubrette on most places on the internet, or JL_nice girl on Twitter. Um and yeah, please come talk to me more about safety tools.
And I will make sure I have links to the website as well as any socials into our show notes for our listeners, so they can find the toolkit, start using it in their games, as well as follow both of you on all social medias. So thank you all for listening today. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at TouchySubsPod to keep up to date when we have new content and new episodes coming out. Please email us any questions, comments, or concerns to touchysubjectspodcast@gmail.com. And please rate and follow us on your favorite podcast listening app. It really does help the show out.
And in the meantime, don't be afraid to challenge, ask, and discuss when it comes to touchy subjects.